Hey everyone, welcome to the Authentic Catholic Man show with Marek and yours truly, Dominic D'Souza. Today we're joined by Michael Jaquith. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's going to
Always
be good
pleasure to be
to
here,
good to
Dominic.
have you. You're both coaches. You're both consultants. We'll get to who you are and what you do in just a second here. The Authentic Catholic Man group is helping Catholic men be strong, fulfilled, and fearless. It's free to join. Get weekly prompts, free videos, group building activities. Marek even hosts a monthly AMA, Ask Marek Anything. And then
Yes,
we have
please.
this show once a month, The Authentic Catholic Men. Very briefly, gentlemen, would you introduce yourselves? Michael, who are you and what is it that you do? And I know we've had you on the Mastermind show, but for the benefit of our guests, our viewers this evening, intro yourself in about a
Absolutely.
minute.
Totally. So, I have a very unique background. I have a PhD in chemistry, worked in the corporate world for a number of years, had this phenomenal boss that basically became like my first coach. And when I got fed up with the whole corporate thing, I said, I don't love the corporate part, but I love working with people. And I jumped into the entrepreneurial path. Along this point, I should note we had 6 kids in 8 years. And so there's a
Wow.
lot going on through this process. We're very blessed with 3 girls and 3 boys. And my wife is a saint in training. It's been a lot, but it's been this amazing discovery of how fulfilling it is to take a guy who wants to transform his life and help him get there, because all of us have that goal. Like, as Catholics, we have this vision. We look to God and we say, yes, there's holiness, I want to get there. And then life happens and stuff gets in the way, and the dog poops in the front room, and all of a sudden there's fertility challenges in your marriage, and every little challenge the devil can throw at you, he does, and you're like, oh, I thought I was supposed to aim for holiness. And I can help guys do that. And that is just the most awesome thing of all time. My wife is also a life coach. So if you guys have wives that are looking, we both do one-on-one and group work.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Marek, over to you.
Yeah, so me, I kind of do two things, kind of like St. Paul, like kind of my tent making is executive coaching. I'm really blessed to work with a number of fantastic corporations. And really my specialty is leadership and using emotional intelligence to help leaders become confident with their own style, develop their own style, and become the kind of leaders that everyone likes to follow. And so that's been definitely a tremendous blessing that pays the bills. But kind of like in the ministry space, that what I'm really fascinated by is, if you will, to me, and I'm kind of like, I always challenge myself to come up with a new analogy every time we talk, is I like to think of Authentic Catholic Men Group as kind of like a CrossFit box where we come together, we do our best. We are at different levels, but we all try to go to the next level and share expertise and teach each other the things that we do know, share experiences, because that's what I've noticed when I was military, corporate America, even CrossFit box. That's what works the best, is when people show up authentically, drop the bullshit and just be honest where they are, and then just feel comfortable showing up as their full selves, and from that learning those synergies, that's where magic happens. And so that I just don't feel like there's enough of that in the Catholic space, and that's my vision for the Authentic Catholic Man Group, is the CrossFit of holiness, if you will.
I think that's cool. That's a great summary. And then for those who are watching, thanks for joining us live this evening. Go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. If they're, we can bring them on later on and put them to Michael or Marek. We will. I am your host this evening, Dominic D'Souza, founder of Smart Catholics, Catholic dork, lover of Catholic men stuff, trying to be a fly on the wall and ending up emceeing. So tonight we're talking about hell and back, and it's about the theme of addiction. So the path out of sin, weakness and addiction, and how we find the strength to be a hero. Very quickly, this project, The Authentic Catholic Man, it is sponsored by Heroic Men. So if you are looking for free Catholic shows and inspirational, movies and content, check out heroicmen.com. We love what they're doing and they love what we're doing. So it's a fantastic sort of support situation going on there. Alrighty, gentlemen. Very briefly, I wanted to get your thoughts on tonight's topic. Again, we've got this title, Hell and Back. It's a very dramatic sort of thing. It really makes me think of the Psalm. It makes me think of World War II, or Marek, especially in your case, being an army ranger. You have a different kind of in the field experience with what that must be like that I can't even imagine. Can you speak to that? What comes to your mind as we start talking about something like weakness and addiction and sin? That idea of going to hell and then coming back within your experience as as coaches. Michael, would you mind going first?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think I see that a lot so much in the concept of freedom. And I think our culture has this idea right now that freedom is this idea to do whatever I want. And I use the analogy with clients a lot. I say, let's imagine that tonight I decided I was totally free and I just drank all the alcohol I could possibly want, just glug, 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 glug. Sometime around 2 a.m., I'm come to in front of a toilet, puking my guts out. And all of a sudden, I'm not free at all. And well, praise the Lord, I no longer drink like I did in college. That's a separate story to come. I think when I look at to hell and back, I see how quickly we humans can surrender the good that God has given us, surrender our ability to choose the good, whether it's through pornography, whether it's through anger, whatever it is. And the world oftentimes cheers us on the way, rallying, yeah, this is awesome, go get it. And the ability, especially as Catholics, to look at the ways in which we've fallen into these literally hellish sins and come back through the grace of God, through hard work, through a dedication to pursue the holiness.
Fantastic. Marek, your thoughts on tonight's topic?
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of different ways we can approach this, but to me, the whole concept of hell, from my experience, especially as man, is not having the ability to overcome the particular situation. For example, at war, when it comes to war, it's especially what I've experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan is that uncertainty of you don't know what's going to happen. Whenever you go on a patrol, it's the thing that's tough about these days when it comes to war is the enemy doesn't wear uniform anymore, and so when you shoot, are you going to shoot the enemy? Are you going to shoot some kid? Are you going to shoot somebody innocent? And that lack of clarity is very stressful. We as humans, and I encounter it all the time in executive coaching, is we want certainty. And there's actually a very good quote, I believe it's from Brene Brown, is that our minds want certainty, and in absence of facts, we make up shitty stories. And when it comes to kind of like Catholic faith, we say that, hey, I watch pornography, but I can't overcome it. I know it's crap, but I just can't do it. And it seems like everyone else does it. So like, well, I mean, there's nothing else I can do. I give it a try. Or when it comes to alcohol, yes, I drink a little bit too much, but so does everybody. And it seems to be acceptable in the world. And I don't want to be the guy at the holiday party who doesn't drink. And so to me, that concept of hell really comes down to us as men feeling unable to overcome some kind of insurmountable odds. And to us as men, it's very counterintuitive because we want to be the hero. We want to overcome it. And when we don't, it makes us feel less like men. And it makes us feel weak, and it makes us feel less worthy. And because of that, it's hard for us to live up to our full potential with that mindset.
Yeah, Michael, any thoughts come to mind just out of that intro?
That's so great. And I think about oftentimes the word control. And this is a word that I've struggled with, and most men I know struggle with this word control of, oh, I just need to be in control of this or that. And I think about, say, Jocko Willits or David Goggins and these ideas of extreme ownership. And I think our society has twisted those a little way because at the end of the day, there's only one thing I ever can control, and that's how I show up. And I think when I think about how do I want to break free of whether it's pornography or drinking or even being the one guy who's not drinking at the holiday party, is to realize that there's absolutely nothing I can do to control the people around me. I control myself. And so much of that work comes from just taking responsibility that I show up in the way that I set myself up to show up. What were I thinking? What were my preparations? What's going on inside me? And we love as humans to blame what's happening on someone else. Well, you see, I drank too much because my wife was mad at me. I clicked on porn because my wife said no. Like there's these great excuses we love to have that we throw out there, which are ways of surrendering. What's so funny is in the effort to get more control, we actually surrender the control we do have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I can even speak from my experience because I watched porn for a long time. I drank alcohol for a long time. I masturbated for a long time. And in each case, I really gave it a genuine try to try to quit. And I think that another thing that is a challenge, especially for us men, is even if we give it a genuine try, because there's no timeline, there's no kind of like a forecast when we're going to be able to quit. It's very hard to persist. And I see it a lot in, especially like in special forces training, or I see a lot even like when I went to Ranger school, is the whole idea like to really test somebody's character, to really prepare somebody for combat, is to give them a mission and don't let them know when that mission is going to be over. For example, it could be something as going on the run, on the fast-paced run, but you have no idea whether it's going to be over in 10 meters, in kilometer or 10K. And I'm telling you, that's what really screws you with your mind. And another good analogy, I think it actually came from Joel Osteen, but it's actually a very good one. He was talking about how like he was going up the hill, and because it was dark, he felt like giving up. But all of a sudden the lights started coming out, and he noticed that the top of the hill was a couple hundred meters away, and all of a sudden he got this energy to finish it up. And I think that's another thing that's very challenging for men, is that even though they have the best intentions, because it's not happening and they don't know exactly when kind of the finish line is, that really makes it extra hard to persist and persevere and trust in the Lord, that even though we don't see it on the surface, God is working in our hearts, and in God's time things will happen. But it will happen more than likely. It will take longer than you expected, but when it does, it's going to make all the difference. And that's what I experienced with pornography. I mean, it took me like 3-4 years to quit, and when I did, it's like, oh my God, it's praise the Lord. Same thing with masturbation, same thing with alcohol, and quite frankly, when I started my business with pride, that was, it's never, there's always something else to overcome. But in each case, I've seen a lot in myself, and also my coaching practice, is dealing with that certainty when not knowing when it's going to be the finish line, and that really, really screws it with our minds.
Yeah, I was thinking about if I were to define hell, as I've really, I don't know, reflected on it and sat with it, try to understand it. I mean, obviously it's defined as the rejection of God, and an attempt to like radically turn into self. And, how possible is that really, is like, but I think one way to think about it is what's referred to as the mark of the beast. I think the best way to think about that is like the snake eating its tail, the Ouroboros, that ancient symbol. It's like an inability to get out of your own little pattern, and as hard as you pedal, as hard as you, try, all you can do is spin, and just spin faster in that circle. And that's why we can't muscle our way out of weakness and into holiness. It's sometimes I like to think about our souls as like a steel cell, and there's a door in it, and we have like one power, and that's to open that door and to close that door. And God's like, he's knocking on the outside, and if we close that door long enough, we sort of think to ourselves, yeah, if I can stick in here long enough, I'll just like, I'll make it on my own somehow. God finds other ways to get in, to inspire us to open that door, right? To not stay sealed up in our own little hellish room. And he'll find a crack, or he'll make a crack, and he'll shatter, and he'll hurt, and he'll break, because we cannot live on our own energy, completely independent from him. It doesn't work. And so that sense of, how do I break free? And Marek, you spoke about when you did get out from all of it, and then you kind of look back at that situation. You look back at that trap, that cycle, that spiral, and I think that's when we begin to realize, I don't quite know how it happened. I don't quite know what I first bit into that gave me an edge out of this pit that I had thrown myself into. But that had to have been the grace of Christ, working with that. So not exactly giving away the ending here, but let's dig into the sort of first part of tonight's topic. I want to talk about the path out of sin, and it's just kind of a free-for-all, just chatting about that. And what comes to your mind in speaking to the path out of sin and your expertise as life coaches? Michael, would you like to dig into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to kind of tie this into what Marek was just saying about the whole finish line bit. And I think oftentimes we as men think that finish line is so far out there that it just seems discouraging. It's like, the journey of 1,000,000 miles starts with one step. And I also struggled with pornography, as most men have. And I remember thinking to myself, I just need to make it till I'm married, and then it's all better, right? And then so I got married, and for a brief period of time it was, and then I fell back into it again after getting married. And what I eventually came to realize, and this is, I think, really helpful and really practical, is sometimes you create the finish line to be small enough that you can grab it. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just simply, I'm going to make it tonight. Maybe I'm going to make it 1 hour right now without making that click. And then I'm just going to make it into my bed sheets when fall asleep without making that click. And that's a hill that maybe I can climb. Because the idea of trying to climb the hill for the next 10 years, never clicking, like, oh my gosh, like there's no way. But I might be able to make it an hour. I may be able to make it just tonight. And then tomorrow night's a whole new battle. And I think that's true whether, like, whatever you're struggling with, pornography, weight loss, alcohol, whatever vice it is that's trying to grab you, when that big distant goal, the path out is never to judge oneself by that distant goal. One of my coaches has this concept I loved. It's called the gap in the gain. And the concept here is, imagine you're sailing out of a harbor, right? No matter how far you sail, you can only see to the edge of that horizon. And then so every time you make another mile, you're like, oh, I still have just as far to go. I still have just as far to go. But if you just turn around, look behind you and say, wow, I've been another mile. That port is getting smaller and smaller and smaller behind me. And focusing on the gain. Oh, I made it 1 day without clicking in pornography. I made it 2 days without clicking in pornography. Focusing on that gain changes how our minds are processing this problem from it's an insurmountable dragon I could never slay because I don't have a shield or sword, to, oh, I squished a mouse. Where's the next mouse I can squish?
Yeah, definitely. So that's definitely, I can definitely relate to that from my own journey. And then like another thing, just to kind of add on to that, that I always find helpful is it's, so like things like not clicking on porn or not taking a drink, it's definitely super helpful, but that's kind of like addressing the symptoms. You really have to figure out what's the disease that's driving towards it. So for example, I'll be honest with you, for me, pornography, it took me a while to understand it, but really at the core of my pornography addiction was not pornography at all. It was really the fact that I never developed skills to have intimate relationships. I came from a very abusive household. I've never seen first of all, my parents didn't live together, but even when they were together, I've never seen them have a loving conversation. I just didn't know how to relate. And so to me, pornography was just kind of like a quick fix of feeling intimate. And another thing I've noticed is that a huge trigger for me is that when I was not feeling comfortable, I would go to watch pornography. Luckily it wasn't compulsive, like where I would watch it at work, get myself in trouble. But every chance that I got, whenever I got stressed, it was just that cue, hey, I'm feeling stressed, let me watch pornography, kind of numb myself out. And so in addition to what Michael said, which is definitely true, is I would really encourage you, whatever that sin is, find out what the root cause is. Because, for example, also in my case, alcohol, it's really funny because I drank alcohol for a long time, and I'm Polish, so I have to drink vodka. There's all these stereotypes to uphold. But another thing that I've noticed is that the main reason why I drank alcohol is because I felt uncomfortable in social situations. And I thought that if I drink, then it's gonna be better for others. And even though it wasn't, at least it felt better for me. And so like one thing that I found really helpful is to kind of getting to the root cause of that is like, hey, how can I become more comfortable? And the ironic thing is that when it comes to porn, masturbation, or alcohol, I don't miss it at all. I really don't, because I was able to find healthy ways to satisfy that trigger for those addictions. Now, having said that, like when there are things on Instagram that come up with sexy pictures, things like that, yeah, it does catch my attention. Don't get me wrong, I'm still working on that. But actual like hardcore porn, I have zero desire. It's kind of ironic, something that I couldn't go without on my own for like sometimes even a few hours. Now, quite frankly, I find disgusting because of that. The time it took me to get rid of that habit, replace it, and then fill it with something fulfilling, which at the core is really God.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring up the mention you made, Michael, about a dragon actually, let me lead with it that way. You mentioned a dragon, and I want to go into kind of like neural rewiring, because so much of our addiction it's just like a little program that we train ourselves to go back to. And if we change the circumstances, we can actually rewire ourselves. Like you've described, Marek, you no longer, there's that biological attraction is rewired. It's different. You don't feel the same way because you've spent enough time, I guess, like reconditioning that response. But there's this one story that Jordan Peterson spoke to, how basically everybody needs a dragon. Everybody needs some kind of a problem that is like 1% bigger than your capacity to actually meet it, because you need something that's going to help you level up. If you have a dragon problem that is so massive, you can't even begin to tackle it. Well, what do we do in those situations? That just becomes normal. That just becomes the background. I can't do anything about that. It's so huge. I'm just going to make that part of my reality and just not deal with that. As it relates to something like this, and we've spoken about kind of these issues like the pornography and so on. How do we start thinking or reframing or approaching these, as we're trying to pull out of port, right? I'm curious, Michael, how do we start making this feel like it's a manageable dragon and not something that's completely just like when I was a teen, there was just no thought. When I was having a good day, it's like, oh yeah, it's easy. I've got this, and then as soon as the stimulus is there, wow, new, different person. So how do we start tackling that?
I think three things come to mind. First off, I want to just double down what you just said. I believe the technical term is the zone of proximal development. And this idea of maintaining this focus on a goal that's 1, 5, 10%, whatever, bigger, but just enough of a stretch. And that takes some work to do. But the easiest one I might say is, Marek just said, and thank you for volunteering, there are times you couldn't make it a couple hours. Then I might say, well, if you've only ever made it 3, let's aim for 4. Or maybe 3.5. Like you just choose like that little tiny bit bigger. But I want to go on a deeper level. And the second thing that occurred to me is we all have to realize that not only are we all fallen sinners, but our adversary is way smarter than us. And I think there's a great danger that comes, especially as Catholics, when I see guys who are like, I'm Arbiter of the Sacraments, I will conquer this myself, right? Like, I can do it all. And like, look, God didn't design us to do it all ourselves. Like, it's true that God could magically heal a broken bone. Like, if I right now, I break my bone outside in the ice, he designed the system so I go to a doctor, I get help. And when I struggled with my pornography, one of the things I had to realize was that I couldn't do it myself. And my wife and I went to marriage counseling for years, many, many years, as we both had to learn my own ability to express intimacy emotionally, her own blocks, which are her story to tell, but we both have them. And every human being is born of human parents. And I've oftentimes heard it's far better if a parent saves up money rather than a college fund for a psychotherapy fund, for a coaching fund, for someone to get some help, right? That would probably, especially given the current decline of colleges, go further to making them into the healthy, productive member of society that we all want to be. But we have to understand, like, this is not like if I resolutely decide I will never click again, and I click again, and my response is, I'm the worst human being scum of all time. There's just nothing good that comes from that. And this humility enables us to get help on both the natural and the supernatural level. It lets us go to confession saying, I have failed again. Father, forgive me. I'm human. I'm weak. I failed again. It enables me to be humble in front of this therapist. It's this older woman therapist. It's so embarrassing, guys, sometimes to really sit there in this stupid little office on a little flower couch, right? And there's your wife and she's holding your hand. You're like, I wish I was dead right now. But like, it's so fruitful if you're willing to be courageous. And the first step there is to say, yeah, I'm pretty broken. But then I think the third thing I really want to emphasize is breaking down the goal and reframing it in your mind. And so a lot of times we think, and this kind of ties into the proximal development, but we think of this dragon and we think, oh, his scales have this much armor and his teeth are this long. And I put it all together, it's absolutely insurmountable. But maybe the goal is to change how I look at it. Maybe the goal is just to start changing what I think. Here's a great story. Like, even to today, praise the Lord, I'm sober from pornography for many years. But this summer, we were at the beach, and 3 guys and my good friends of mine, we're all Catholics, and there's just a group of teenage girls that kept walking back and forth wearing dental floss, and we're just like, we just don't want to look at this anymore. And so the 3 of us just literally, we stand up, we turn around, there's a row of like hedges, bushes, just whatever, right behind us. And we both sit down, all 3 of us sit down looking that way, and we're like, the view is a little bit better this way, don't you think? And like just reframing it to being like, what's the battle I can win? Maybe I'll never overcome the fact that as a male, I'm attracted to the female form. And if a bunch of girls walk by wearing dental floss, it's going to trigger thoughts in my brain I don't want. Cool. What can I do instead? How do I reframe the challenge? Maybe it's pornography. And I've come to realize that when I feel emotionally disconnected from my wife is when I have the strongest desire. And what's more so, what happens in my head is I give myself permission in my head. When I did my work, I found that I started my pornography use between 6 to 12 hours before I made my first click. It was a series of thoughts that took place in my head. What are those thoughts for you with whatever struggle you have? Find those thoughts, take them captive, offer them to our Lord, and be like, this is what I'm going to change. Just these thoughts. And that can be extremely powerful. And that's a dragon that's a lot easier to slay.
I love the there's the one little point you made there about owning the fault or accepting the fault and not projecting out a weakness. And Marek, I want to ask you about stereotypes in a second because you brought that up. And I think it's actually a really valuable question or point. But this sense of, this is why I love the authentic Catholic man. As an idea, it's like, we're not going to make my problems, my lack of conditioning, my weakness, I'm not going to make that everybody else's problem. I'm not going to run around and expect everybody to change their lives and change their dress codes and change their personalities because I have no self-control over my own neural conditioning, my poor spirituality, my lack of maturity as a man, and I really value, you gentlemen reorienting this discussion. It's like, no, it's a man is somebody who stands in his own 2 feet, has a responsibility for himself, and out of that strength is then able to do good, in the world. You mentioned confession, and I love this. I'll always share this little moment where I went to confession and I looked over and the priest had 2 reading books. He had a copy of the Magnificat and a copy of Macbeth. Right? Those 2 characters could not be more dissimilar, but that's kind of like where the Catholic lives. Like, here's the ideal and here's where you don't want to be, So Marek, I want to go back to that point about stereotypes, because I think that's what we do as guys a lot, as our brains default to, I need to be this kind of a man, because there's so much we have to think about to just get through the day, to get through the job, to get through the family situations. So we default to like patterns of behavior, being certain kinds of guys. Can you speak to that out of your experience, and then how do you handle that with when people sort of default to that in their conversations with you? How do you get them to start to start waking up, and not defaulting to something like that?
Yeah. So, this is it's a very deep question, but let me kind of like chip away at it in a way that doesn't take too long time. Defaulting to stereotypes, it's kind of like taking the easy way out, kind of like the safe way out, and sometimes it might not appear as taking the easy way out or safe way out. For example, like I worked at ExxonMobil, made really good money, and to the outside world, I was looking, pretty manly, if anything, because I was making good income, but I hated every single minute of it. And so, I mean, not from the beginning, but definitely towards the end. It was very, for a lot of different reasons. And so in that case, I was like, hey, I am a man. Man provides, and to provide the best way, I need to make as much money. So this is exactly what I need to be. And it was hard because, I saw the writing on the wall. People were disappearing left and right. The price of oil was coming down. And so I felt the pressure to find another high-paying job. I interviewed with Google. That's like another story I'll tell you. But I was trying to desperately find something else like that. And so what I would recommend in those situations, actually, one of the companies I coach for is BetterUp. And the cool thing is they have these like really like powerful speakers come in and talk. And actually, I watched a Q&A with this one guy. I'm horrible with names, but he had this like fantastic, I think, analogy of this is going to kind of tie in the dragon and overcoming stereotypes. I think that when it comes to stereotypes, we tend to want to fit in. We tend to want to kind of do what's safe, even though it's not really ours to do. For example, be an entrepreneur because you see Elon Musk on TV, or for example, be Scott Hahn because everybody wants to have a picture with him. That kind of things. Not that these guys are bad, but it's just like if you're trying to be like them just for the sake of their respect, if you will, it's going to be a very tough dragon to overcome. Not because it's you're not capable, but it's not your calling. And so the thing that I found most challenging for men, and myself included, because I was in that box for many years, is understand that what you really need to do is find an intersection of something that you're really good at, something that's like natural to you, and something that changes the world. And a lot of times what happens is, finding jobs just for the paycheck do not fit in that category. And it's just a matter of time. It's like a ticking bomb till it goes off, where you get laid off or it doesn't work out. So what I really encourage people is, like, whenever, and especially men, whenever you feel like something's off, is really find that intersection. And I know that this is definitely not something that happens overnight, although it may. With God, anything's possible. But typically that will take some time. And so what I really encourage people to do is take some time to explore your interests, because a lot of times what happens, especially as men, we are told to do sports because everyone does sports. We are told to get good grades because everybody gets a grade. You're told to be an engineer because that will help you to get a good job. But the problem with that approach is that you are doing things because you're told to do, and if you only focus on that, you don't have enough time to really explore who you are and what your interests are. And so, for example, with me, just to make it more practical, I because I was in the army, I was at ExxonMobil. I always thought that I was a big business guy, big organization guy. That was my kind of like a zone of genius. And I did okay there, no doubt about it. But I always felt off. And what I found through that exploration, again, took a little bit of time, is actually I'm an entrepreneur at heart, which is totally the opposite. And obviously it took me a long time to hit my stride. I can definitely tell you a lot of war stories, how rough it got, but but praise the Lord, now I'm finally hitting my stride, and I'm seeing the difference of doing something that's at the intersection of something that's a calling for me, which is coaching, and the fact that this is such a big impact. Obviously Michael does it in the Catholic space. I do it mostly in the corporate space, but even in the corporate space, it's just amazing how like one thing that I noticed is there's no such thing as business problems. It's always people problems. And it's just amazing when you help people solve that kind of like a business problem, it impacts everything else. Even though obviously ideally you want to do it at the Catholic space, but even if you do it in kind of like how the person shows up, it has a huge impact, not in just their workplace, but in their lives. And so kind of like the long answer to your question is like, when it comes to stereotypes, I think we tend to fall into what's safe, and that's what gets us in trouble. And I know it's hard, but I really encourage you to keep exploring these gifts, focus on what's natural, and find that intersection of what's so natural to you and what's going to change the world. And when you find that, man, it's so worth it. Trust me. It's going to take you a while to get there. It's going to be a lot of embarrassments. It's going to take a lot of humility. It's going to be very humbling, but you're going to be so glad that you did it.
I've got
Michael,
to
I
jump in
wanna
real quick and add
put that
one
over
bit
to
to
you.
that, because it's just burning me right now, because I agree with you so much here. But the one last little piece I've got to pin the tail here is to say, so many clients, it ties into self-worth, and it's fear, but it's fear that I'm not good enough. And I struggle with this for so long. Fear that I think God's called me to something else, but what if I'm not good enough for that? And I'll be honest, just as you're saying, I've got my own horror stories of entrepreneurial life, and every single career, vocation, whatever, is bumpy and rough and hard. I mean, the monks of old used to wear the wool shirts with the camel's hair every time they thought they were getting along too well, just to make sure it kept hard. We moderns don't need that. We've got the world provides plenty of that. But that fear, that self-worth, am I good enough? Am I going to be enough? And this leads me to two different things I heard once. God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And if you think God is calling you to something and this fear pops up, I don't know, I might not be able to, I might not be good enough. I deal with so many guys, especially guys who are really struggling still to get married, and that cast this deep seat of, am I just not good enough? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something broken with me? I feel like God's calling me this direction. It's not working. Clearly, there's something wrong with me. And there's a submission that has to happen, that God made me. God has a plan. He knows my weaknesses. They're legion, but he knows them, and he has a plan through them anyways. And I remember this quote from John Maxwell. He says, there's two great moments in your life, and there's the moment that you were born and the moment you discover why. And with the result, the blessing of pushing through the fear that I might not be good enough is the chance to discover that moment of why.
There's a quote I just saw this morning that I think dovetails with that beautifully, and it goes, there are two great tragedies in life. One is to never begin, and the second is to never reach the mastery, to never get to the end. So the second part then of tonight's chat, and we've got another 10, 15 minutes or so, I want to talk about heroism then. So we've talked about the problems, many kinds of problems that there are, and we didn't even touch on other areas like, ego and narcissism and whatever. But if you're out there and you're thinking about that stuff, maybe ping Michael or Marek to go a little more deeply. But if we take the what do you call them, the big issues, so we've identified some of the problems. We started talking about the path out of it. Now I want to talk about that horizon, that destination, that goal. So we used the phrase, the strength to be a hero. And I think a lot of us instantly maybe think of like Captain America, maybe Christ our Lord, absolutely delightfully impossible, mythical examples. And if we were to talk about practical heroism, how would you two define that?
Well, I think I would start by debasing this idea that we have. I love the Marvel movies, so don't misunderstand. But I think the Marvel movies have done so much harm to what our concept of a true hero is. And I love the classic literature about this. It's so funny you mentioned Macbeth, and you read about the great characters in Shakespeare's plays or wherever, and they don't become a hero by, flashing lightning through the sky and wielding a mighty hammer or building an iron suit that blows everything up around them, right? They become a hero because in every person's life, there comes one tiny moment when they make this decision. Am I willing to face this thing that really scares the snot out of me, step up to the plate and do it anyways? And that's heroism. I'm going to share a story that a friend of mine has that he publicly shares. And he was very, very, very successful as a businessman and extremely successful. And there came a point when it became clear to him, especially in hindsight, that the devil was offering him, saying, just keep putting more of yourself into this business and I will give you the whole world. Worship me and I will give you all this for your own. And it was so tempting. Like his wife was kind of not happy with him at the time. His kids were moved up. He's like, I got nothing left. Why not? Just dive on in. But the heroic thing he did was just say no to what so many of us would say, hey, building a huge business, like making tons of money, that's a good thing, right? But God spoke to him in that moment and said, actually, no, this is too much. You need to go back and love your wife and be present for your adult children. And that heroic moment he had was just to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And that perspective is so different. And let me share one more story. And this is a personal story. My wife suffers from really, really terrible pregnancies. And the last 3 pregnancies she's had, 4 to 6 months, where her joints are basically dissolving and she's unable to get out of bed for more than just going to the bathroom. And we also suffer from extremely high fertile levels. Like we're just super, super fertile. And so we're Catholics and we try to be inconsistent with the Catholic Church. And I remember after the birth of our 6th child, we really were struggling with the temptation to find a solution other than NFP. And I'll be honest, like watching my wife go through the really, really terrible nature, like she would just be screaming agony, trying to get to the bathroom. And that's so hard as a husband. And I look at my heroic moment there as a moment that's never seen by anybody else, but the moment in the depth of my heart when the devil said, all you need to do is get 2 snips and this problem will be gone. You don't have to go for, the year and a half of abstinence that you're probably staring down right now. And with the failure point being your wife screaming in bed again. Just 2 snips, Michael, what's the big deal? And just that heroic moment for me, which at the moment, like it was terrifying. The one thing I had to cling to was the truth of the Catholic faith and my desire for holiness. And it's that little tiny decision that we made to say, no, we're not going to go down the path. We're going to stay faithful to the teaching of the church. These sort of things don't get published on NBC News. They don't come with heroic music playing in the background with some sort of Marvel theme. They come in this quiet interior. And when we make them again and again and again and again, you see stories like Abraham Lincoln. You see stories like all of the great heroes of history, which one tiny decision that really sucked, but we had enough vision to say, this is what's right, and I'm willing to endure the pain for it.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Marek, over to you. Practical heroism, especially given your just varied background and so on. How would you encourage or describe that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Michael gave a great example, and it's a very true example. So there's definitely like the big moments, but I would also add to it that sometimes to get to those big moments, you have to focus on the small moments, because I think a lot of times, and I've been guilty of it, so it's like, well, I when it comes to big things, I'll make the right decision, and obviously it didn't happen, because just like with working out, you can't just show up on marathon day and finish number 1. You have to practice. It takes a lot of practice, and so it's kind of like, from my experience, to kind of get to the micro level testimonies, you have to focus on the daily choices and to be frank, own your shit. I mean, it's all of us have our problems. I am definitely not perfect by any means. Just the other day, I'll give you an example. My wife said something that made me feel like she values her dogs more than me. And how stupid is that? But when you have these feelings, it's really hard to rationalize. And the funny thing is like I have that awareness, but these are the feelings that I had. And at some point, because the way I work, I don't lash out, but I shut down. That's kind of like my stress reaction, is to shut down. And my wife confronted me. She's like, "What's going on? You're not being yourself." And I was like, "Oh, don't worry, babe, we'll come." He's like, "No, we gotta talk about it." And God, she did, and we talked about it, and we clarified that what she said was misunderstood by me. And long story short, it was just a stupid thing. But thank God we talked about it. And so the thing that I really encourage you to do is focus on those daily moments. That's why, for example, me, I journal every single day. Everybody I coach, I encourage to journal, because in order to identify those moments and figure out what's the best way for you to change, is you have to have some kind of reflection time. And to me, the simplest way to do that is your journaling. Is talk about is like, hey, what was my most negative emotion of the day? What did I do contribute to it? What can I do to minimize it? And so to me, the heroism obviously comes from situations like Michael describes, no doubt about it. But if you're waiting for those moments, I think you'll find yourself wanting. I think that the best way to start is with small daily choices. Own your stuff, figure out what's the best way to fix the situation, knowing that it might not happen overnight, but just take those steps. And I really, really encourage you from the practical standpoint is to pick up the practice of journaling, because that will give you that reflective space to be able to step back, sharpen your axe, if you will. So that way, when you step into the battle, you can hack more efficiently.
I think that's great. I think there's, I've read recently, it's become kind of a chronic problem, especially with maybe my generation. It's called, what is it called? Being alexithymic. Maybe, Michael, you're familiar with that word, but it's that sense of not understanding your emotional states, literally not having a vocabulary for what you're feeling. And especially, people who struggle with this often go to video games a lot.
Yeah.
Or if you play a lot of video games, it can end up numbing down your ability to understand what emotions you're feeling. And I think that as guys in general, we're just like that. And that kind of goes back to that stereotype, I think, where the way a lot of us are raised is to, you don't go there. You don't deal with that. You don't think about that. If you're feeling something, just shut it down, get the job done, So on that front of, journaling and so on, helping you understand what is it you're feeling. Because if you are never looking in at just what's happening in the processes that are happening, then this sort of goes back to what we were saying earlier. If you have no ability to do that, just to know what you are feeling as a human being, the things that you're going through internally, you're going to have a really hard time identifying, well, what triggered me and I got to this point, if you've never actually slowed down to observe and write about a moment in your day. I love the point that you gentlemen have both raised tonight about it's not always about changing the world. Sometimes, and actually more importantly, it's about changing your world. Maybe it's changing your family's world, your wife's world, your loved one's world. And maybe if you're a young man who's catching this, sometimes it's changing yourself so that you have the capacity to do something. And I love this short video by Jordan Peterson that's out there, this idea that he's like, young men need responsibility, not less. We need more. You need one thing that you go out and do. Christ would call it pick up your cross. Find a cross. If it doesn't feel like you've got one, do something. Volunteer at your local soup kitchen. Help your local parish. Find a group, join a club where you're going to be asked to do something and you have to show up and you'll be like, I don't know how to do this, but I know this is going to be good for me and I want to learn. Ask for the responsibility and then you will grow. It's like this, my wife and I were watching this little show the other night of this young couple just recently married, and the girl is like, oh, I want a baby. And the guy's a police officer and he's like, we're not ready for this. I want a baby. And so she's putting all this pressure on him and he's like, well, okay. She comes home one day and he's literally borrowed a baby from a neighbor and she's like, oh. And so he passes the baby off and then she's like, Now what? It did something and it needs food. I don't know how to. And so he let her, he didn't just dump it on her. He spent the day with her babysitting this baby. The point being, by the end, she had a better sense of what it was she was interested in, and I think especially as young men, if you're interested in something, don't just dream about it. Go out and try it. Volunteer somewhere. Shoulder a burden, become a man. And that is a form of daily heroism. It's achievable because then people look at you and maybe you end up inspiring them. Maybe you end up inspiring yourself and you look back and you're like, wow, that's who I was. And I'm different now. I like who I am now because I'm kind of working out who I am on my own terms. You take cues from people, and especially men you respect and women respect, and and listen, but then also start finding a way to chart your own path to greater responsibility. I think that's how would you define, let's maybe wrap here. How would you define a man, Michael?
How to define a man? I think every boy, as he's growing up, at some point in time needs an existing man that he respects to come up to him and affirm that he is a man. And in that, there's a recognition, I think, of some level of mastery, of oneself. And I think of a man as I'm a man when I'm able to stand tall on my own 2 feet, absorb the blows of the world, absorb the blows of my own endocrine system, more on that in a second, and understand that God the Father looks down upon me. And I long for him to say, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. He is a man standing tall and he represents me to the world. Like I think of King David, and what is it King David did? King David wasn't sinless, obviously. King David committed all the sins we're talking about here today. And yet he was called a man after God's own heart. And I look at what is it King David did? He consistently went back to God. He consistently, when he fell, he got up again and oriented himself, set his aim properly. He owned his own mistakes. He owned what he did. He owned where he screwed up. And one last thing I need to throw into my definition of a man, and this kind of ties off what you said a second ago, is this whole emotion bit. And I encounter so many men that are unwilling to go into the depths of their own emotions. As some of them are just telling me, literally, they tell me straight face to face, Michael, I don't have feelings. I never feel anything. And I say to him, that's scientific.
You feel really strongly about that, don't you?
Yeah. They're so convinced. They're so convinced. So many men have shut down their awareness of this process because they have a human brain. Like we know the studies, the prefrontal cortex is the seat of the feelings. And there's people who have that region of their brain damaged and are thus literally unable to have feelings. And one great side effect is that is along with that comes the inability to make a decision. Like the study talks about how you have this individual with this damage to the prefrontal cortex, right? And they present them with their favorite meal in front of them. They say, you're allowed to eat this. This is your favorite food. And they say, oh, wow, that is my favorite food. And yeah, I'm really hungry. What do you think I should do? They're literally unable to make that decision because these feelings we have are the seat of our decisions of what we do. And being a man owns saying, yes, I'm upset. I'm feeling upset because this thing is important to me. I'm not feeling upset because what you did. I'm not upset because you said these things. I'm upset because of what is important to me and how I view the world and what my value system is, what my responsibility is, and taking that responsibility, even for my own feelings, as a precursor for taking responsibility for my own actions. And this is really, really tough and requires us men to slow the process down. We have oftentimes what I call compound feelings, where my kid does something that makes me super angry, and then I overreact, and then my overreaction makes me feel ashamed, and then I underreact and end with this hot mess where I've done both ends of the spectrum. And it takes this awareness and what I say manly responsibility to step up and say, oh, I felt both this and this for these reasons. What do I want to do about that? And how do I want to show up better next time?
Brilliant. Marek, if you were to how do you like to define a man?
No, yeah, that's a tough question. It seems so simple, but it's very hard to answer. And obviously, Michael gave a good answer, but it's not something you can answer just in one sentence. I mean, to me, I think that the definite components that would go into that answer has to be an element of ownership, not necessarily being perfect, but being able to understand that, hey, even though I'm not perfect, I don't have everything. I take ownership for the process of getting there. You know, having some kind of like ownership of your ability to get to where you want to go. It has to have an element of having a relationship with God, having, again, not being perfect, because none of us are perfect, but having good foundation that, for example, when you go off to college, you're not just going to become an atheist. No, it's having that relationship that, in spite of what happens, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you always, even though it might take you a little bit of time, you always come back to God, having that relationship with God. And then I think that the third element is having some kind of a vision, and it doesn't have to be a perfect vision for the rest of your life, everything perfect, but having some kind of like a starting point, and having some kind of a process where you refine that vision, so that way you can keep moving towards that full potential, knowing full well that there's no such thing as perfection, there's no such thing as kind of having a final destination when it comes to on earth, because this is not a final destination, but having a process where you keep challenging yourself and having some kind of a vision that becomes a foundation for your life and your growth and your ability to make your contribution here on earth while you're here on the earthly realm, if you will.
Yeah. I think if I were to take a stab at it, I would want to come to the theme of God the Father. I think that almost anything that you can say about the idea of being a man can also and does also apply to women. But I think it's a matter of starting points. I think that women start from the point of view of, being a mother, and work their way towards how to understand, how to live out the virtues of fathering, right? And men start from the other point. We start from the idea of a father, and then we have to learn to work our way towards, well, how do I mother my environment? And Christ sometimes uses these wonderfully mothering terms, like he looks at Jerusalem and he cries and says, I wish I could have held you like a hen holds her eggs, and broods them and warms them to life. It's like, wow, I don't exactly see Aragorn, using that phrase, but I think that, how would I define a man? It would come to the idea of fathering. And what does a father do? It's somebody who, one, creates life around them. That's what God the Father does. I think that's what we also do. We create life in others. We ignite inspiration in other people. We empower them to do things, not just for ourselves. A father, I think the word comes from the Latin, or actually, no, the word daddy, I think, comes from the Latin da, to give, right? The father is the one who gives to, his children, who gives to his community. And at the same time, the one who guards the ramparts, who guards the walls, the point of defense. So you're like a creator, but you're also a defender. Someone who maintains limits, as Jordan Peterson always talks about, the person who is the frontier with the chaos that's within ourselves, and the chaos that's within our environments, and the chaos that sort of creeps into our families and sort of explodes out of our little kids and our corgis pooping in the living room. And, the things that try to break down our relationships. We need to be highly attuned to chaos, because our job is to bring order. Now, like I said, this is going to apply to women, everywhere anyway. But again, our starting point, though, I think, as a father, is the one who is creative, who gives life, who shoulders responsibility, who creates space for freedom, and who's aware of the effects of chaos as it is always, affecting us, and who brings order out of chaos everywhere. Yeah, bit of a dorky sort of response, but to me, that's what gets me up in the morning, because that's at that stage where I am in my life with, my wife and a little girl and trying to hold down a job, that kind of thing there. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. I think hell and back, I think this was a great convo. If you have 30 seconds, final thought you'd like to leave with our viewers, Michael.
I love how you ended with bringing order out of chaos. And I can think of no more masculine thing. Peterson talks all the time about the masculinity of order and the feminine of chaos. And we, as moderns, can so easily mishear that and take something that's not meant by those terms. But this concept that us men, we strive to go into chaos, metaphorically here, and then bring back something to establish more order about it. What's great about order is I am doing that when I've gone into my feelings regarding I'm angry my wife said this thing, brought order and established order and said, no, my order will be, I'm going to stand on my own 2 feet and say, maybe you didn't mean it this way, but when you said this thing, I took it to mean this, and that hurt me, and I'm feeling upset because of that. And there's an order there. We go out into our jobs, and whatever crazy shenanigans happens, we live in a world full of shenanigans right now. I talk to so many guys who COVID, just politics, whatever, our workplaces are filled with chaos. And to carve out a little piece of order, I've got a good friend of mine from 2 jobs ago. He still wants to come to every camping trip he can because he loves the order that we can create as men. And so that's what I would leave you with as well, is look for ways to create order, not in a masochistic way, not in a men are better way, but just say, this is what God calls you to do, to take one little thing to make it better. You start internally and then you look out from there.
Marek, last thoughts for in 1 minute.
And then, so just to kind of make it a cheesy plug, there's no way, obviously, we can have all the answers in just 1 hour. So please join us in the Authentic Men community. It's totally free. Go to smartcatholics.com, join our community, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, because ultimately that's how we'll get to the answers from sharing our experiences, talking about it, and challenging ourselves to be a better version of ourselves, because we all know that when it comes to being a man, whatever definition you use, there's no such thing as success. And if you think there is such thing as success, then you're probably living in denial. So please join us. We'd love to have you.
There you go. Perfect place to end. So just visit us at smartcatholics.com. You can set up a free profile, jump in and join us. We are faithful to the Holy Father and the Church. We're free of trolls and ads and toxicity, and we celebrate and we work really hard at this to cultivate a culture of kindness and learning. Thanks again for everybody who watched us live. Hey, Crystal, one of our super fans. It's awesome to have you with us today. Merry Christmas to everyone. This is our December episode. Thank you again, gentlemen. It was good to spend the time with you this evening.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
God bless you guys.
God bless.